Hello, my name is Reverend Jason Groh, and I will be presenting a sermon entitled Salt and Light. It's based off of the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 5, verses 13 through 20, and I'd invite you to follow along if you have a Bible handy with you. And so please hear this reading, Matthew 5, verses 13 through 20. You are the salt of the earth. But if salt has lost its taste, how can its saltiness be restored? It is no longer good for anything, but is thrown out and trampled underfoot. You are the light of the world. A city built on a hill cannot be hid. No one, after lighting a lamp, puts it under a bushel basket, but on the lampstand, and it gives light to all in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father in heaven. Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have come not to abolish, but to fulfill. For truly I tell you, until heaven and earth pass away, not one letter, not one stroke of a letter will pass from the law until all is accomplished. Therefore, whoever breaks one of the least of these commandments and teaches others to do the same will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever does them and teaches them will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. For I tell you, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Let the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable and pleasing to you, O Lord, our rock and our Redeemer. As we open the Gospel of Matthew, we find that Jesus is preaching a sermon of his own. It's called the Sermon on the Mount. It's not just a singular sort of sermon, but it's this special section out of Matthew's Gospel, which contains numerous teachings about what life is like in the kingdom of heaven, what some of the priorities and values of it are. The location of this sermon, as the name Sermon on the Mount suggests, is up on a large mountain where a large crowd has flocked to Jesus and want to hear what he had to say. And so he goes up the mountain, taking with him his disciples, and they circle around him. And Jesus sits, as is customary for a Jewish teacher to sit, and he begins to speak. And he tells them plainly these two statements about their identity. You are the salt of the earth, and you are the light of the world. You are salt and light. These are words of blessing, something that they already are, not something that they have to strive to become. As Jesus tells them they are the light of the world, he's evoking this deep sense of biblical imagery, words the people of God have heard before. The people of Israel are to be a blessing to the Gentiles, to all the world, wherever they find themselves. And so Jesus sort of taps into these biblical roots as articulated by the prophet Isaiah when he says, "It is too light a thing that you should be my servant, to raise up the tribes of Jacob and restore the survivors to Israel. I will give you as a light to the nations, that my salvation may reach the ends of the earth." And then it's not enough that Jesus leaves his message as light alone, but he goes on to say, you are the salt of the earth. Salt was a very valuable commodity in Jesus' day. In a lot of ways today, I think we take salt for granted. You can just go to Hy-Vee or Fairway or wherever you go to buy groceries, and for a couple bucks, you can buy all the salt that you'll need probably for a few years in the salts baking aisle, you know, the cheap iodized salt that you can get. But if you look a little bit closer in that section, you can also find some nicer types of salts. You can find kosher salt that you can pick up for just another buck or two more, or you could buy sea salt, or you could even buy rock salt, which you use for making ice cream. But if you are a real connoisseur of salt, there are a lot of options out there for you. You can go to specialty grocery stores, shop online, look around, and you can find all sorts of different types of salts, different colors, different flavors, different textures. They come in red, brown, green, orange, yellow, each one of them infused with a different color and a different flavor. And I love using salts. I love to cook, and just adding a pinch here and a pinch there really just makes the flavors of the ingredients stand out and draws the flavors out with the different ingredients that you cook with. I was pleasantly surprised this past Christmas when I opened this nice little package, and in it contained this little bitty jar of truffle-infused sea salt. And it's just delicious. It's got this very savory, mushroom-like quality to it. And it's just delicious. It makes my mouth water and start to salivate just thinking about it. But I don't think you have to limit salt to just its cooking purposes. I'm sure that a lot of you, like me, have some Epsom salt back home. You know, that stuff that you pour into your hot bath water to help ease your aching muscles, transforming your bath from its just normal cleansing purposes to something that's more of a luxurious experience. Or you could talk about some of the more medicinal qualities of salt. I had a few nasty colds this past fall and winter, and one of the nurses that I worked with at the hospital doing my clinical pastoral education unit suggested that I do a salt water gargle. She said that it would help kind of restore the natural saline and the salts that are in your body, especially around your sinus area. And so I tried it, and sure enough, it helped. You know, the Epsom salt is nice too. I bet you have some home in your linen closet somewhere, and it's great for soaking your wounds and absorbing and drawing out some of the infections among Epsom salt's other uses. Salt is also an essential component of keeping roads clear from snow and ice in the wintertime. It's used all the time whenever there's the prediction of a storm or whenever it starts to hit. It helps dissipate and melt some of the ice and snow as it hits the ground. Usually it's in this form of a briny type solution. Salt really is indeed a valuable commodity, whether it's here in the 21st century or back in Jesus' day. In his day, salt was most commonly used to preserve things. It was used as a preserving agent. And a lot of times it's not all that different than when you would preserve a piece of meat, like a ham or a country ham here in Kentucky is what they like to use it for. It's not uncommon to find country ham at the church where I'm serving now, Bethany Christian Church, at their fellowship table. It's very salty when you bite into it, and the salt in it really helps preserve the tasty meat. And it keeps it from going bad so that it can age for a few years. So just as salt helps to preserve food and keeps it from going bad, so too are Jesus' followers to act in the world in ways that will keep it wholesome, in ways that will prevent it from going to rank and ruin. Preserving peace and justice and human dignity are chief among those concerns. And doing those things doesn't sound like a very exciting or revolutionary thing to do, but one of the first ethical principles really is just to do no harm. We are to conserve, as one commentator notes, we are to conserve as much well-being as we can in our relationships with other people, in our relationships with ourselves, in our relationships with the world, and in our relationships with God. We are to serve as the conduits through which God's blessing can flow. We are to draw out the light from the world around us, to make it shine forth, to fill the world with light. We are to be the conduits through which God can use us in our daily lives, so that wherever we are in the world, we can be for God. So that whenever someone sees us, they don't just see us, but they see God through us, through our actions, through our words, through our attitudes. And get this, there are no special requirements to be this. There are no special requirements for anyone to be called salt or for anyone to be called light. Jesus doesn't say, if you want to become salt and light, I'm going to need you to go do this, and then I'm going to need you to do that. Or, before I'll call you salt and light, I'm going to need to see this list of things from you. No. Rather, he says both simply and plainly and directly, you are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world. These are words of sheer blessing, commendation, affirmation, and ultimately commissioning. So go. Be God's blessings to others through your deeds of loving kindness, for that is who you are. Live the type of life and faith. Living this type of life and faith doesn't earn God's love, because God's love always is freely and graciously given. But this is about living a Christ-like life, living like Jesus, living a new and transformed life as part of the kingdom of heaven. We get to live with the exciting possibilities that God does choose, that God can and does use us in our everyday lives, in our everyday situations, to make the world a more wholesome place, to draw out the best, to draw out the truth and the light in those around us, to spur one another on toward faithful living. And it is God who graciously empowers us to do this. It is God who makes us to be the conduits through which God's blessings can flow. And it is living in such a way to be a blessing, a light to the world, salt of the earth, where others are blessed because of God. You know, one of the most wonderful and delicious things you can make with salt usually has little to no salt in it at all. And I'm speaking, of course, of the most delicious ice cream dessert imaginable. Ice cream. Right now, I have been enjoying this limited edition special version of Edie's ice cream, their Girl Scout Samoa cookie ice cream, limited edition stuff. And it's delicious in and of itself, but if you want the real stuff, if you want real ice cream, pure, wholesome, creamy, delicious goodness, there's absolutely nothing that beats my grandparents' homemade vanilla ice cream. It's so good that they almost always keep some in the freezer. Whenever they have company over, they can just pull it out and serve it plain as it is. And if you want to make the good homemade stuff, you have to have rock salt. It helps to cool the temperature down of the ingredients as they mix and merge and meld together as the ice cream forms. The salt melts the ice that's on the outside of the container, and it helps make this briny solution that absorbs the heat as the mixing ingredients merge together. It acts as a cooling agent, makes this briny mixture, and it serves. It gives off its blessing, it gives away its blessing, so that the ice cream project can come together and be enjoyed by all. Maybe, just maybe, that's what being salt of the earth is too. Being the living conduit through which you can be for God, through which God's blessings can flow, preserving and drawing out the goodness from all of your surroundings wherever you are. I greatly appreciate how the late author Henry Nouwen puts it when he says, the great mystery of doing ministry is that when we ourselves are overwhelmed by our own weaknesses, by our own limitations, we can still be so transparent that the Spirit of God, the divine counselor, can shine through and bring light to those around us. The great mystery of ministry is that while we ourselves are overwhelmed by our own weaknesses and limitations, we can still be so transparent that the Spirit of God, the divine counselor, can shine through and bring light to others around us. So go, let your light shine, for you are the salt of the earth. Amen.